we won't actually get to play with birds, but we're going to be taking advantage of this wonderful resource. It's called the Macaulay Library. And that is a website that's basically hosted by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And it has just a huge diversity of especially birdsong, but it also has other kinds of animal noises. And we'll be using spectrographs, which we talked about, I think, going back to even to like chapter 2. We'll be looking at spectrographs or spectrograms to analyze birdsong and ultimately conduct a kind of a little mini study to try to understand how reproductive behavior, like song production, can serve as a species isolating mechanism and promote either hybridization across species or facilitate, in some cases, the divergence of species. So let's see. So that's basically the plan. So I do have a pre-lab for that. I'm sorry I didn't get it posted yet, but I will get it posted right after class here. The pre-lab, I don't think it'll take you too long, but I am going to ask you to, I am going to ask you to read an article. It's a popular science article, but it kind of breaks down different, breaks down how to analyze these spectrograms, which we've looked at a little already, so you have some background in it. But I think it'll help clarify some things. And it will also you kind of take a stab at interpreting and actually what I'm going to have you do is produce some sort of sketched out spectrogram. So I'm going to post that on Canvas. What I'd like you to do is just print it and bring it and submit it in paper copy because I'm going to ask you to draw out some very simple spectrograms that are depicting certain kinds of things. This way we're all really comfortable with analyzing the spectrograms and we can immediately proceed into doing an actual study on Thursday. Okay, so that's the deal on that. Any questions on the pre-lab? I'll get it up as soon as possible after class here so you can do it. Also, I just wanted to make you guys aware, so there will be three people coming to campus over the remainder of the semester, and so what's left in November, and then even it sounds like we're going to have somebody maybe on the last day of class on December 7th also. But so there'll be 3 speakers. I think all of them are going to have something that's relevant to this course or your major, knowing you guys. So I would encourage you, I'm trying to decide if we'll do something specifically related to them for the course. And I haven't quite finalized my thoughts on that, but at least I want you to be aware of them. The next one, or the first one, is going to be next Wednesday. We just haven't figured out the schedule yet, but sometime in the afternoon, we're going to have them doing a presentation of their research. And so I strongly encourage you to attend that. Also, we have there will be some opportunity for some students. We can't have everybody go, but some students to meet with them like over a lunch meeting at Torvium probably. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to let me know. Okay. Whew. So those are announcements. Let's sort of dive in. Where we were, if you remember, is we were walking through chapter 10, so we were trying to understand different kinds of mating systems. And the first kind of mating system we talked about is a monogamous mating system, which is interesting, particularly from the male's perspective, because you wouldn't expect males to want to be monogamous, or you wouldn't, I should put it, I don't like to use that want word, because I don't think they're often thinking this. You wouldn't expect selection to favor monogamy in males, and yet there are species in which the males are absolutely monogamous. And so we talked about these 2 major explanations for why they would tend to be so. The next 2 that we're going to talk about are the polyandrous mating systems and the polygynous mating systems. And in these cases, so in the polyandrous mating system, we're looking at cases where you have females that are mating multiple times. Oftentimes, the males are effectively monogamous, but the females are mating multiple times. So these are really interesting systems because it's not immediately clear, I think, what the females are gaining from mating with multiple males. So again, polyandry occurs when females are mating with multiple males. And as we talked about, most of the time, one male is going to be able to fertilize all of a female's eggs. So it's not immediately obvious why it is that she would benefit from doing this. And in fact, there's all kinds of costs that could be introduced. If nothing else, every time she mates with a new male, there's an increased chance of exposure to pathogens, sexually transmitted diseases, or just, mites or other kinds of things that they can pick up by mating and coming into contact with another male. So it's very unclear what they're gaining from this, or I think we would have to talk about and find benefits that they could gain that would overcome these detriments, because the benefit is probably not going to be about just like doubling your offspring number like it is in males. So why, this graph actually shows something about this. So this is kind of interesting. This is showing a measure of white blood cells across species. I think these are in primates. So they basically do a blood smear, and they count how many white blood cells are they producing. It's sort of an indication of how much activity do they have to have of their immune system. At least one indication of that. And what they end up finding is that those primate species that are more polyandrous, so those cases where the females mate with numerous males, like I would guess that these are probably bonobos up here, because they mate all the time, both males and females. The more polyandrous a species is, the higher the white blood cell count they tend to have, and that's indicative that they're encountering either just they're encountering more pathogens, and so they've upregulated their immune system, or just they have sort of a standing baseline that's higher than other species because of the pathogens that they're likely to encounter. So again, there's got to be a cost to this. So what are the benefits? Kind of like we talked about last time, there are likely to be different kinds of benefits females get for the kinds of behavior, reproductive behavior they engage in. And we again will break it down into either indirect benefits or direct benefits. The indirect benefits would be those that are related to basically the genetic benefits that their offspring are gaining. There's three major explanations here: the fertility insurance explanation, for hypothesis, the good genes explanation, and the genetic compatibility explanation. There's also direct benefits that they could get, though. So these are broken. I'll just read them off. There's the more resources hypothesis, the more care hypothesis, the better protection, harassment reduction hypothesis. That's kind of my phrasing, but I like it. And the infanticide reduction hypothesis. So we're going to walk through each of these and talk about specific benefits that they can be getting. I should say the fertility insurance one I actually don't even have a slide on. The idea here is that it could be the case that occasionally you'll run into a male that's not is infertile or has low sperm count, for example, or is not able to produce viable sperm that are functional. And so I guess one possible benefit you could get by mating with at least a second male is that at least you're sort of ensuring that you're going to get some kind of a benefit. Most of the time, though, most of the males in populations are fully capable of fertilizing any female's eggs, so we got to look for other explanations. Here's one. It's called the good genes hypothesis. You've seen this before, certainly. But the idea is that by being polyandrous, a female may be better able to secure good genes for her offspring. And so, for example, you might have a situation where a female might have a social partner that's of relatively low quality, but that might just be the only social partner she was able to get. And she may form kind of a pair bond with that individual, but then may sneak off and basically solicit extra pair copulations to get better quality genes for her offspring. An example is this yellow-toothed cavy, which is this little guy that's down here, where females that are permitted to have multiple mates end up having higher offspring viability. And so what this indicates is, and that's compared to females where they're basically just assigned one social partner, and that's the only partner that they get to have. On average, if they're allowed to seek out extra pair copulations, they're able to get higher quality offspring. And these guys are kind of interesting. It's kind of funny. They've got this poor little cavy here that they're sitting, but it's a male, and you can tell he's a male because, there you can see there. They have enormous testes. They're kind of like chimpanzees in that because they do this multiple mating with some frequency, they have you do have a situation where you have lots of sperm competition, really intense sperm competition. So the males do produce enormous quantities of sperm to try to compete with one another at that level. But the females are certainly involved in regulating this to some degree also, and they're trying to solicit the best quality mates they can get. Sorry, I'm fumbling with the lights here. No, that's not the one I want. I want that one. Okay. Sometimes getting high quality males and getting high quality genes can mean getting a sexy son So it might not just be about viability selection. You're trying to get genes that promote good survivorship, but you might also be trying to get male or get offspring, male offspring. So when you some of your offspring are likely to be male, you may be able to secure male offspring that are more attractive than other ones. This is an experiment that was done in crickets, where here you're looking at total number of matings on the y-axis here, and we have to kind of walk through this one. But in this case, you've got, what was the difference here? Yeah, so in this, I think in both these experiments, they're kind of replicates of each other. But the idea is that if you have a sexy male, so you basically have a population of males, you have them all screened. So you evaluate what females prefer, which males females prefer, and you identify which ones are the sexy males, the S ones, and which ones are undesirable, which are the U males. And what you end up finding is that that the sons of the most attractive males tend to secure more matings than the sons of the undesirable males, which does really nicely indicate that there are genes that are being passed from parent to offspring, from the males to their male offspring, that are facilitating or making them more attractive. Effectively, like these literally are sexy sons. And the result is that they do better in mating interactions than do the sons of the undesirable males that are less attractive. So again, you're trying by having extra pair copulations, so by being polyandrous, females may be able to secure those really high quality genes and put their offspring in a better situation. If their offspring are doing better, then their own reproductive success, the female's reproductive success, is also increasing. Their genes will be, the female's genes will be passed on as well. Kind of related idea, this is still indirect benefits, is not so much about good genes in a vacuum. So it's not so much about finding the males that just have the best genes that are out there in a population. But it may be also about finding males that have genes that are good complements for your own genes. So all the females certainly have their own genes, and they're going to be passing those on to their offspring. And one sort of a thought experiment for how this might work is that if you go and mate with another individual that has very similar genes to your own, for example, maybe a sibling, the offspring that are produced from that mating will tend to be very homozygous. They'll tend to have a lot of the same genes. They won't have a lot of heterozygosity in them. You may expose deleterious lethal alleles, but you're not giving sort of a variety of genetic combinations to your offspring. And so by engaging in polyandry, females may be mating with more than one male and fathering offspring from more than one male, and therefore their offspring will tend to have more genetic variation. And that may result in them having, at least some of your offspring having nice advantageous combinations of alleles. You're kind of spreading your bets out. Instead of investing all in one male, you're investing in the sperm of numerous males, and you're diversifying your portfolio of your offspring's genetic combinations, basically. So if you have diversified investments, this is going to help guarantee that at least some advantageous genetic combinations will exist within your offspring. At least this is sort of the idea. I think we talked about pseudoscorpions before, these guys that will hitch rides on the backs of some larger beetles. But there have been studies done with pseudoscorpions looking at the degree to which they're able to produce genetically diverse offspring. And so one indication of whether or not they're sort of succeeding in this is just to look at the survivorship of their offspring. So in this case, they're looking at, here is a case where you've got single males in the laboratory, multiple males in the laboratory, and then here's where you get, by multiple males, I mean the female gets to mate with multiple males in the laboratory. And here's a case where they collected females from the wild that have already mated and already been inseminated in the field, and recorded then the number of nymphs, which is basically the number of offspring that they're able to produce. And what you see is that in those cases where females have the opportunity to mate with more than one male, they'll tend to produce more viable offspring. And so the idea is that the reason you have a detriment here is not that these guys are necessarily inbred, but the offspring she creates from just mating with one male tend to not have as diversified genetic combinations, and as a result, fewer of them will be viable. They won't have sort of the diversity of genetic information that allows you to have large numbers of offspring. So this was in pseudoscorpions. Superb starlings. Here's another bird. These guys, this picture always looks like a fake bird to me, but that is a real thing. What they found is that females that go off and leave their group, so these birds live in these social groups, and some females will leave and find additional mates that are outside of their social group. So they'll travel some, go and spend that energy and time to do so, and then come back. If you track those females that actually do this, they tend to have offspring that have higher heterozygosity. So yeah, so in this case, we're looking at those females that went off and had offspring sired by an extra pair mate versus those that were sired by a mating pair by their actual social bonded pair. And they can determine this through microsatellite tracking. So they're basically trying to figure out which male they ultimately sired each of these offspring. And in those cases where she actually leaves her social group, goes elsewhere and finds another mate, so invests a lot of time and energy in being polyandrous, in those cases she benefits tremendously in terms of the amount of heterozygosity of her offspring compared to when she just mates within her own, with her own partner. Now, interestingly enough, if she just mates within her social group, so she has a social partner, basically a mate, but then she just goes and finds another male that's nearby, she doesn't seem to get that benefit. And presumably what's happening here is that the males within the social group all tend to be somewhat related to each other. And so by leaving and going to a completely different group, she's able to find a new population of genes that she can then provide and provision into her offspring. So this is the advantage of going outside of the group. It's an extra group, extra pair copulation. And those young produced by that tend to have very nice heterozygosity, which should allow them to better weather the sort of unpredictable environment that every animal lives in terms of pathogens, in terms of environmental challenges, that kind of thing. Those make sense? So it's a little less intuitive, I think, in these cases than just straight up good genes. It's not about finding the male that has the best genes. It's finding males that have a diversity of genes and males that have genes that are good complements to your own genes that you can then have offspring that are nice and heterozygous and therefore in a better genetic situation to handle the unpredictable environment. All right. So those were indirect benefits having to do with the genetics of their offspring. Polyandry can also be driven by material or direct benefits, where females are directly receiving some reward that gives them an advantage, oftentimes a survival advantage, by choosing a particular male. So we've already talked about nuptial gifts. In many cases, you'll have situations where females directly receive a nuptial gift. So this is this hangfly we talked about. Here he is giving a moth, and he will give that moth to a female, and then she will, females are choosy based on the size of the reward that they're getting. So the better, I mean, that seems like an awfully big reward. So by providing a really nice quality meal for the female, males are likely to get a mating. From the female's perspective then, it becomes advantageous to mate with multiple males, because every time you mate with a new male, you get a new free meal. And so in this way, you're getting additional resources by going through with that mating opportunity. This is another study that was looking at an alternative to this, where instead of providing a nuptial gift in terms of an actual food item, a lot of insects provide spermatophores, and it's not just insects, a lot of arthropods provide spermatophores where they create this nutrient packet that we've talked about that they provide to the females. And so this was a study that was looking at how much those resource benefits, the additional resource benefits they get, translates into additional reproductive output by the female. Because presumably if a female is getting more resources by mating with more males and getting more spermatophores, she should be able to increase the number of eggs she produces, because eggs are so resource intensive. So in this case, they're looking at the average number across different groups of pierids. So these are different species of pierids. They're looking at the average number of mates per female. So 1 would be everybody is monogamous all the time. 2 would be every female in that species mates 2 times, and then all these guys are sort of somewhere in between. And then they're looking at their actual reproductive output in terms of eggs laid. And what you can see happen in this case is that the more mates a female has, so on average, the higher the reproductive output of that species. And it's a really nice, clear trend. So this is clearly indicating a strong benefit to gaining more resources by mating multiple times. Each mating that female butterfly gets, she gets a new spermatophore. So she gets a new packet of protein that she can use to invest in her egg production. And clearly they seem to do just that. They invest in their egg production. All right, so they can gain additional resources by mating with more than one male. Another benefit, direct benefit they can get is they can gain additional care. And so we see this in a lot of species where by mating with more than one male, she may be able to get more than one male helping her in terms of producing offspring and providing parental care. So in the case of, here are these superb starlings again, which again, they totally look fake to me. They're just so striking. They've got these really bright iridescent blues on the top, and then they have this sort of really white eye that's sort of weird looking. But these guys, in these situations, in that species, females will mate with more than one male. And the female will then, so there'll be a female helping to raise offspring. But then she'll have more than one male also helping raise offspring because all of those males have mated with her. Therefore, they're all getting some benefit to providing parental care because some of the offspring they're helping to raise will likely be theirs. And so by doing this, these extra pair, by mating multiple times, she's able to get more helpers to provision young at her nest. Galapagos hawks do the same thing. So I don't know which of these is a female, but one female will tend to mate with upwards of sometimes 8 different males. And so the males, because there's a chance at least that some of those eggs that she lays will be their offspring, they will provide parental care because selection is favoring them to do so. I think it probably goes without saying that in both of these cases, like this is kind of surprising behavior on the part of the males because you might expect them, especially if there's some competition and they're not guaranteed that the offspring they're helping to raise are going to be their own, you'd really expect in those situations they probably you'd expect them to benefit more by going off and just seeking additional matings. But in these cases, you tend to have a really severely male-biased operational sex ratio. And so what that means is that there are tons of males out there and very few females. And so a male may be very unlikely to be able to secure an alternative mate that he'd be able to monopolize her eggs. So from his perspective, your only shot is just to mate with the one female and then maximize her reproductive output by providing parental care. So this is the additional care explanation for polyandry. A couple others. There's the harassment reduction explanation. So in many species, you have basically males that will just kind of hound females and sometimes do more than hound. They may even directly try to crush her or suppress her or otherwise coerce her into mating. So we talked about garter snakes, I think, earlier in the semester. So here's a female garter snake, and you got all these stupid males that are kind of glomming all over her. So here's a male, here's a male, here's a male. And they literally can suffocate her. And so in some cases, there's like this cloacal escape response thing that they will sometimes induce in her. But there's also an argument that sometimes it's to her benefit just to go ahead and mate, get it over with, and that way the males will let her go on her way, as opposed to continuing to harass and potentially harm her. And so this is one explanation why a female might mate multiple times. It doesn't mean it's necessarily obviously to her benefit. It's kind of a cost-benefit analysis where, yeah, okay, I'll just go ahead and mate with you so you stop bothering me about it. Which, you can judge the morality of the garter snake, but they are what they are. There's also then the infanticide reduction explanation. This one's pretty straightforward. So if you mate with more than one male, those males, there's a chance that the offspring you carry could be your own or could be their own, and so they're less likely to engage in infanticide. We talked about that, I think, even going back to chapter 1, where female horses, if they go off and mate with a stallion in some other stable, you bring them back, they very likely will immediately start mating with the stallions at their local stable. And the argument there is that it's an infanticide reduction explanation, or infanticide reduction measure, so that she can prevent infanticide of her offspring just by mating with every male and giving him a chance to be the father of those offspring. Okay? So that's polyandry. Some of these are, maybe a little uncomfortable. I don't love these ideas that this is a good reason. It's not necessarily a good reason to mate, but these are sort of less obvious cases where the female is not necessarily benefiting, but she's sort of playing damage control, I guess, might be a way to think about it. Questions on polyandry? So we had indirect benefits, we had direct benefits, we had all kinds of explanations for it, but they're, I think you want to keep all those in mind. The most common kind of mating system is this last mating system, which is a polygynous mating system. So across species of animals, this is by far the most common, because here you've got animals that are sort of behaving in the way that we sort of generally expect females and males to behave, where females generally mate only one time, and males will mate numerous times, and that's kind of our default. But even within this, we've got a couple different explanations for how this kind of system works. So how is it that females are only mating one time? How is it that males are mating multiple times? And so the different explanations for polygynous systems that your book presents are a female defense hypothesis, a resource defense hypothesis, scramble competitions, and then one of the most, I think maybe the most interesting, but also maybe the most confusing, is the Lek polygyny explanation. So let's sort of walk through these guys one by one. First one is female defense polygyny. So in this case, you have what happens in female defense polygyny is, again, you've got sort of a group. You have a group of females, and the group of females are together for some reason that has nothing to do with reproduction. So they are, oftentimes they're grouping together as a predation avoidance mechanism, right? So the more you are, we talked about dilution effect or selfish herd effect. For some reason, females are gathering. And immediately once females start to gather for a reason, then that becomes sort of a limited resource, you could think of it, where males, if males can exclude other males from being near those females, then the males have an increased likelihood of being able to mate with those individual females. So females are grouping up for some reason that has nothing to do with reproduction, but then the males come along and defend those groups of females from other males. This will tend to be favored when females are already forming defensible groups. And oftentimes, I think females probably benefit if you're looking across species in terms of their, in terms of what's happening here. So, so here you've got a case where you have a herd of female horses, and then here are two stallions that are kind of going at it, and only one of them will sort of be the victor and stay with that group of females, and the other one will basically be chased off. And the females will likely mate with whoever is the victor between these two stallions. Now, on one level, it seems like you're sort of removing all female choice, and that seems like sort of a disadvantage. But in a way, this is pretty advantageous for females because the males are self-screening themselves. They're basically demonstrating that they are vigorous, that they are in good health, because only the healthy ones will be able to hang on to the group of females. And so by mating with him, you're probably getting good quality genes for your offspring. Here's another example. It's a little hard to see, but this is a group of female bats. And then you've got one little male bat that's over here, and this male bat will defend that group of females in the same sort of way that we're seeing with the stallions. This one I particularly like just because they're so weird. So this is a little crustacean, and they're kind of like a hermit crab. They're not actually a hermit crab, but they're similar to them in that they basically build their homes in shells. And in this case, this is the male here, and he's much larger than the females. And what he will do is kind of poke along and pick up shells and actually find shells of females, and he will glue her shell that she's living in to his shells, and just basically take her with him. And then come along and he'll find another female and glue her along, and he may get 3, 4, 5 females attached to his little apartment complex of shells that he's carting around with him. So I think they're kind of hilarious. But again, females are grouping up now. He's kind of forcing them to group up in a way by gluing them together, but he will then defend these individuals and try to prevent other males from coming along and, evicting him from his home. But, other males will come along and try to fight with him over possession of this little apartment complex. Just think they're weird. They're pretty fun. So that's female defense explanation, or the female defense polygyny. There's other kinds of polygyny, though. So you can have a resource defense polygyny. So the difference here is that instead of females grouping up for, the types of reasons that females group up, instead, males in this case will basically find a pre-existing resource that females will kind of flock to, and they will then defend that resource, and in so doing, prevent other males from being near that resource and get the opportunity to mate with those females. So it's I think maybe the difference here is you can think of that in the resource defense thing, there's kind of a fixed resource that exists in the environment. And that resource may be relatively rare and isolated. So if males defend that, females will come to that resource, and he will then get the opportunity to mate with those individuals. So examples of this, so here are these little antlered flies. These guys basically have egg-laying sites where females only lay eggs on certain species of fallen trees, and there won't be that many of that species of fallen tree existing in a forest. So the males will find those fallen trees and then basically defend them from other males, keep other males away. Females will come along, lay their eggs, and he'll get the opportunity to mate with her at those sites. Cichlids, this one is in a way is kind of similar to what we saw with those little crustaceans. This is a weird cichlid where there's a huge sexual size dimorphism. So this is the male, and he's nice and big. The females are puny, and they actually nest in these little shells, these little snail shells. You can actually see in this picture, it's a little hard to see. So here's a snail shell that will be about this size, and that's a female. That's not a juvenile. That's a female that's nesting in this little snail shell. So the female, compared to the male, will be about this big. Very weird kind of a situation. But what the males do is they go around and they gather up these shells and put them all together in basically like a little, they're calling them a midden. It's almost like a harem. But again, they're kind of creating an apartment complex of these shells, and then females will come along and get access to those shells by mating with that male. And so he's sort of defending this resource that he's created, this nesting site that he's created. And he'll get multiple matings this way. So maybe those are probably the two most straightforward of the various ways in which males can be polygynous. The next one is, I don't know, in a way, I guess this one's also kind of straightforward, but it's kind of different. It has a different vibe to it, and that's called a scramble competition. Scramble competitions are basically all about speed. And so the idea here is that males compete in a big scramble where they're running around the environment. They're not really competing with each other physically in terms of aggressive interactions. It's just all about trying to find females first and get to those females and have the opportunity to mate with those females. So usually have very little aggression, but it's the most fit, most mobile males that are able to find the most females in the population, and therefore they will be the ones that will get to mate the most often. This will tend to be favored when females are too widespread to be defended, so they're not grouping up in any kind of way. And if they're not grouping, you can't defend groups of females, or you can't defend resources. They don't need, because these females tend to be so widespread. It can also occur with really compressed breeding seasons. So sometimes you'll hear about these, they're called explosive breeding assemblages. Frogs are famous for doing this, where basically all the female frogs of a species will lay their eggs over a night or two in a given summer. And so there's just basically this huge scramble where males are coming in, the females are laying eggs, males are coming in and just trying to fertilize every egg they can find. So they find all the females they can, they fertilize as many possible eggs as possible. But again, it's all about speed. So the faster you are, the more mobile you are, the better able and the better endurance you have, the more able you will be to find lots of eggs to fertilize in these explosive breeding assemblages. There's some mammals that do this too. I mean, there's all kinds of examples of these kinds of explosive breeding assemblages. Fireflies are shown here because these guys effectively have a scramble competition. It doesn't look like they're racing, But males just spend their entire lives basically roaming about the environment trying to find the telltale flicker of a female who has eclosed recently and is ready to mate. And the first males that find her will usually be the ones that get to mate with her. Then we have leks. So leks are kind of odd. Leks are situations where you have usually kind of a display arena. It can be kind of diffuse and spread out. Bowerbirds are kind of like this, where there are numerous display arenas around a fairly large space. Sometimes it can be really localized, though, where you just kind of literally just have a plain where there's lots of males that will all gather, and they defend little territories, and they secure a space. But they don't spend a lot of time being aggressive with one another. They basically just secure a display arena. They keep that little space, and then they display to females that come by. And the females will then come to this lek, evaluate numerous males, and then choose who they're going to mate with. So again, you can have sort of a dispersed arena, or you can have a really isolated arena. So in this case here, you've got a group of antelope where it's a little hard to see, but there are males kind of scattered about. And the males will, they'll keep other males away from them, but for the most part, they're there to display to females. Females will go around, so here's a female, and she'll evaluate, apparently, numerous males within that group, and then choose one whom she will ultimately mate with. And it's often really biased. So if you look at the number of females that mate with a given male, so you compare the males across these different individuals, and you compare how many individuals they get to mate with. What you end up finding is that the males that are at the center of the lek tend to mate more often than the males that are around the periphery of the lek. So there seems to be something of a hierarchy going on. And kind of like with bowerbirds, it's often the case that one or a few of the males that are in a lek get almost all of the mating opportunities. And the other satellite males that are around the periphery get almost no mating opportunities. So you have this situation where males don't apparently provide any kind of resources. They don't provide any kind of benefits to the female, at least not direct benefits. And yet you have this huge skew where only a few individuals get to mate. And most of the other males that are existing in that lek do not get to mate. Sometimes this is called the paradox of the lek. So this idea that there are huge inequalities in male mating success, despite the fact that there's no direct benefits provided to the females that would, clearly give a reason why you should choose one male over the other. Usually the explanation for this is that if it's not direct benefits, it's probably indirect benefits, right? Some sort of genetic benefits that they're gaining by getting the best quality male. Now this is a weird situation. It tends to be, this tends to evolve within populations where, again, females are kind of wide and spread out, and males have relatively little chance of finding them on their own. So they could go around in a scramble and try to find them out in the environment, but in some species it seems to be more advantageous for males to gather in a certain location and basically just wait for females to come to them. And that's what's happening in a lek. And then the females choose amongst the males. Now there's actually 3 different major explanations for why you might have a lek evolve. And these have great names. So the first one is called the hot spot hypothesis. So the idea is that, again, rather than going off and roaming about the entire environment looking for females, it might be better for males to just gather in an area where females are likely to show up. It might be too large of an area to defend and monopolize, but you can then basically display to any females that happen to come into this area. So again, the idea of a hot spot hypothesis is that males will gather in an area where females routinely travel. So sage grouse are sometimes thought to be an example of this. I think I showed a video of sage grouse, right? They kind of walk around on the plains. They have these weird air sacs that inflate. They're just bizarro animals. But what they've done in this graph is try to map where leks occur and map that and compare that to where you have high female density. In all cases, the females are relatively spread out. But if you map this on as far as where females actually are, so here's sort of a geographical map of this entire area around Lake Crowley, wherever the heck that is. But each of these red dots is a different lek that exists, where you'll have a congregation of males. And so the hot spot hypothesis would predict that males will tend to form leks in areas where females often are fairly abundant. And so this graph in the shading here, this is a heat map that's showing where females are most likely to be found within the population. And what you do find is that leks, not always, but usually tend to be found in those areas where females also tend to spend a lot of their time. And leks are not found out here far from these areas where females tend to spend a lot of their time. So this is supportive of this hot spot hypothesis. All right, so there's the hot spot hypothesis. And then we have the hot shot hypothesis, which is, again, I love little plays on. Good hypothesis names I think are just golden. So the hot shot hypothesis argues that the leks are forming not around areas where females are likely to be per se. Instead, there's a hot shot. There's a highly attractive male. And so the other males basically just gather around him and try to solicit matings from females that are coming to come see him. So it's a different sort of an idea here. Females are not going to a particular location. They're going to a particular male. And the other males are just basically hoping to capitalize on that fact. So one prediction that comes from this is that the best territories should vary as the males die and or are replaced. So, when you have, if there's one hot shot and he disappears from your population, you should see leks appearing in other locations where there's some other hot shot around that the males will sort of congregate around. Here's a study that was done in black grouse. So these are transects across space. So this is a vertical line and a horizontal line in meters. So we're going 160 meters in each direction across this area where a lek exists. And so the lek is always kind of in this one location. But what they're showing is that the number of the males that are getting the most mates tend to differ and tend to be the males that get the most mates are in different locations in different years. And so this is in sort of support of this hot shot hypothesis where the females are not going to a spot per se, they're going to a hot shot, a particular individual. So in 1987, for example, the best matings and the best male was sort of in this little area over here. And this is where most of the matings occurred. Whereas in 1988, it was over here. It's not like it's just sort of linear progression. It's sort of bopping from different areas within this lek. And this is at least a little bit supportive of this hot shot hypothesis. I just found that a little dissatisfactory, but that's one support for it. Better support is when you have experimental data. So if you look at when you actually remove a dominant male, an alpha male from a lek, you can basically watch and see what then happens with all of the other males. Do they stay in that area, which would support the hot spot hypothesis, or do they disperse and go find some other dominant male to try to mooch off of? So this is a study that was done in great snipes. You guys ever heard of snipe hunting? Yeah, so this is a thing. These are Australian snipes, but this is a snipe. It's a little sandpiper shorebird. But these guys tend to display at night. Here are two males that are sort of competing with one another. But what they ended up finding in this experiment is that if you experimentally remove the dominant males from the leks, then the lek just basically disperses. So the other males kind of go on their way and they find some other males to hang around with. Whereas in contrast, if you remove a subordinate male, so if you remove a male from the periphery, he just basically gets replaced. But the lek stays put, and it seems to be centered around this alpha male. So this is nice support for the hot shot hypothesis here, that they're gathering in this one specific location because there's a really good male there. He's probably still going to get most of the matings, but maybe some of these subordinate males will get a chance to mate with some females. Maybe if he's occupied, maybe they'll get a chance to mate with some other females that come along. The final explanation is the female preference hypothesis. So the female preference hypothesis is stating that females actually prefer to mate with males that are gathered in a location where there's lots of males around. And so the idea here is that females are driving the lekking behavior in the males, that they won't mate if just there's a solitary male hanging around, that they're much more likely to mate with somebody if they can compare numerous males in one spot and then choose those males. So you could test this, and one test of this explanation was done in these are called little bustards, which is kind of cute. So here's a female little bustard, but in this experiment they actually made little stuffed little bustard males, And they arrayed them in different population densities or male densities in different locations. And so what they found, so here's Lek size. This is sort of the critical axis over here. And then this is female number over here. And what they found is that as they, up to a point, as they increased the size of the Lek, so as they went from 1 individual to 2 individuals to 4 individuals to 8 individuals, as you increase Lek size, you also tended to see an increase in the number of females that will flock to that location. So that's sort of like this upward part of the curve. Now there did seem to be sort of a maximum, and this part doesn't support this explanation, where once you get above 8 or so, the number really drops off, and so you're not getting females gathering in locations where there's huge numbers of males. So maybe, you know, it's kind of intermediate support, I feel like, for this explanation. But it is indicative that females have some sort of preference where they like to be, they're more likely to gather in locations where there's numerous males, and they're particularly interested in evaluating multiple males at the same time. So that would drive this lekking behavior in these animals. Questions on leks? All right, we done it. So we finished off mating systems. I'm sorry we didn't get to the homework, but I just love mating systems too much, and I always talk too long. So what we'll do is we will, on Thursday, we will start with the Chapter 9 homework. We'll talk about reproductive behavior homework there. And then we will, in the afternoon, again, we'll be doing this bird song lab. So I will be posting a pre-lab for that very soon. I will see you guys